Hello everyone, I hope you are doing well and having a great Tuesday so far. In today's forecast update, we're going to be discussing our severe weather risk over the next few days, and we'll just be pretty much picking up on our upcoming severe weather days and what we could potentially expect as we get towards the latter half of April and then slowly starting to get into May. And so we've been in a pretty active period over the last really a couple of weeks, especially the last week. So we're going to have somewhat of, you could say, filler days where we'll have maybe marginal or slight risk in between our major days. And so that'll be the trend for the next few days. But then we could potentially see a increase of severe weather as we get once again towards the kind of latter half of April and towards the early portion of May. And so we'll go ahead and get started here with our Storm Prediction Center outlooks for the upcoming days. So starting off with our Tuesday severe weather outlook, and so we do have a slight risk, a level 2 out of 5 risk of severe weather into southern Kansas, into western Oklahoma, and the panhandle of Texas. And then we have a marginal risk that extends all the way up into portions of the Midwest and around that slight risk. And then out to the east into the Carolinas, we have a level 1 out of 5 marginal risk in place there. And so for Tuesday, we just have a 2% tornado risk into southeastern New Mexico and then into Texas as well. And I did forget to mention this area into extreme eastern New Mexico does include, or that slight risk does include that area into extreme eastern New Mexico. And so once again, we have that 2% tornado risk for tomorrow. And then we have our 15% wind risk in the yellow color, and then a 5% wind risk in the brown color all the way up into the Midwest, and a 5% wind risk out to the east into the Carolinas for Tuesday. And then finally, we do have a 15% hail risk in the yellow color once again, and a 5% hail risk around that in the brown color. And then up to the east, once again, a 5% hail risk there for Tuesday in the Carolinas as well. Then looking at Wednesday, and so we do have a slight risk into extreme southeastern New Mexico, and then into portions of West Texas and the panhandle of Texas for Wednesday. And then we also have a level 1 out of 5 marginal risk all the way up into the central U.S., into portions of the central U.S., all the way from southeast Wyoming into Nebraska, Kansas, Colorado, Oklahoma, Texas, and New Mexico for Wednesday. So just briefly taking a quick look at our upcoming severe weather days for Tuesday and Wednesday on the HRRR. And so if we look here on the HRRR, let me move my marker a little bit there. And so as you get into Tuesday morning, you have your storm starting to develop across much of the south, but you start to get some of that development up into the Carolinas by about midday. And so if you continue that on even further, you still have those storms beginning to form there and some lingering into the evening hours. But then as you look into the south central U.S., you have some storm coverage here and more isolated storm coverage into Texas and even Mexico as well, showing up on the HRRR weather model. And so continuing that on even further, you get into late tomorrow evening and into tomorrow night. Finally getting into Wednesday, you still could have some storms here and maybe even a somewhat of a small line of storms tries to develop here into Texas for Tuesday night into Wednesday. We'll have to watch that as well. Somewhat of a kind of sagging boundary showing up there with that line of storms. So that looks like it will continue to move southward by maybe Wednesday morning on the HRRR model, but not a whole lot there to show on the HRRR. And then we'll finally get into Wednesday's threat, but we will not be looking at that on the HRRR just because it is still a little bit far out, especially with this one particular model. Taking a look at the NAM weather model and looking at our mid-levels of the atmosphere, our mid-level winds. And so the 500 millibar level allows us to see any kind of synoptic features, and this allows us to better look at what may be delivering the maybe type of severe, or not type, but type of weather or severe weather across some of these regions. And so if we look at Tuesday's severe weather threat, you can see kind of a weak area of maybe 20 to 30 knot mid-level flow across Mexico and into Texas, and that'll help to provide our severe weather risk for Tuesday. And then as we get into Wednesday, you could see some more um, a kind of jet streak up here, a 60 knot mid-level jet streak up here into the Dakotas and the Great Lakes. But then if you look further to the south, this is where we're going to see our severe weather risk for Wednesday. And so you could see some areas seeing maybe a 20, 30, even a 40 knot mid-level jet in some areas. And so once again, this mid-level flow kind of broad area would help to promote a severe weather threat for Wednesday. And so if you just really take a look at this right here, you don't see a whole lot. I mean, there is once again just this kind of broad area of flow, but there's no defined feature that allows us to see a kind of forcing mechanism for some of these storms. But still, there could be some ample forcing there for storms. So if we look at the NAM here, we'll go to, actually we're going to switch to the GFS for this. And so if we continue to look at the GFS and look at our moisture for Wednesday, and we'll go back actually a little bit here, but as you can see on Tuesday, our moisture is confined mostly to the south central US, but mainly into Texas, once again for Tuesday. But then fast forwarding this as well, and going into Wednesday, you can see our moisture get pumped up into these areas, and that is because of a low-level jet in place across these areas. Not a really strong low-level jet, but it is there for sure, and that would allow for moisture to pump up into these areas. And the colors, the blue colors you see on your screen, that is dew points into the 60-degree range, and then the green colors are dew points into the kind of 50-ish degree range. And so as you can see, you have your dew points well into the 60s, into the south central and even portions of the central US, getting that moisture pushed up into there for Wednesday. But if we continue to look at this here, you still have your keep in mind you still have your mid-level flow across these areas. And then if we look at our low-level jet, once again, you don't have a really strong low-level jet, but you do have a maybe 20, 30 knot low-level jet across some of these areas into maybe Kansas, Oklahoma, the panhandle of Texas for Wednesday night, and that would be just enough for storms to get a spin and maybe have the potential to potentially produce some tornadic activity. But we'll continue to watch that for sure. But I think that'll be the main kind of concern for Wednesday is with any of these storms getting going in that low-level jet area, and with enough mid-level forcing, that will allow for those storms to develop. And so you'll have a sort of a sharp cutoff here between your moist air and your dry air, and that is going to be your dry line. And so storms could probably get developed along this dry line if it were to get maybe defined a little bit more. And so we'll see how that plays out for Wednesday. But I think on Thursday, once again, you'll see that more of a defined feature. And so you'll have those storms riding along that dry line once again between the moist and dry air, or potentially on Thursday. But we'll see as we get to that. But if you continue on the GFS here, it shows moisture getting pumped up into these areas for the next several days. And so that'll bring us to more of our medium to long range discussion, and we'll get to that in just one moment. So once again, looking at our medium to long range discussion, and we were looking at the GEFS for this, and this is our ensembles. And so with the ensembles, this basically gives us an average of different individual members put together, and this basically allows us to see a kind of more accurate or allows us to make a more accurate forecast compared to just using one operational run. And so this is kind of why um, using an ensemble models are a little bit better for using longer for when you're doing medium to long range forecast. And so they are just a little bit more accurate, really, in the medium to long range. I wouldn't say necessarily the medium range, but definitely in the long range. And so if we look at this here, once again, looking at our 500 millibar winds, and we go to Thursday and then finally into Friday. But as you can see across the central US, you have a 20 to maybe 30 knot mid-level kind of mid-level jet across these areas. And so if you continue that on into Friday and then eventually into Saturday, you can see a much more defined feature here on the GEFS ensembles. And so here's our trough finally moving into these areas by Friday night into Saturday. And then as you get further into the run, finally into Sunday as well, I think we could see maybe our first uptick, kind of not necessarily an uptick, but a little bit more of a severe weather threat than what we've been seeing the past couple of days. And so if you look across the central US, you do have areas of 30 to 40, maybe even 50 knot mid-level jet across these areas. Then as you get into Monday, that will continue on to the east, and you still have a pretty potent trough showing up here on the ensembles, and you have a large area of maybe moderate to strong mid-level flow across these areas, and that would once again bring severe weather across these areas, especially the central US, by late this weekend into early next week. And that will continue on to move eastward, and I still think you could see that severe weather area kind of get translated further eastward just a little bit, maybe into the Midwest or Ohio Valley by sometime next week. But still, the details get a little hazy after that, and we'll have to keep an eye on this as we get closer to it. But that is just going to be the main idea for the next really week or week and a half. And so if we look at our low level jets with this as well, and we'll go to Sunday. And so if we go to Sunday night, you can see this is the EPS ensembles, not the GEFS ensembles. But as you can see across the central US, even on the ensembles, it does show a pretty large area of a 30 to 40, really mid 40 low level jet across these areas. And that once again probably be able to pump up moisture into these areas and once again deliver a severe weather risk late this weekend and early next week. Continuing that on even further into Tuesday, same idea with a pretty decent looking low level jet just on the ensembles here across portions of the Ohio Valley and mid south for Tuesday. So finally, if we look at our dew points here, this is once again the mean. And if we go to, let's just start out with Saturday. And as you can see across the south central US, you have dew points well into the 60s across these areas. Then as you get into Sunday, you have that push of moisture farther to the north, all the way up into the north central US, but dew points into the 60s all the way up to South Dakota. Then as you get into Monday, you have a broad moist sector here showing up on the EPS ensembles for Monday. And continuing that on once again even further, you have a pretty broad moist sector even into the middle of next week. So once again, we'll have to continue to watch this and see how this plays out. But that is going to be it for our models for today's forecast. And finally, before we close out the video, we're just going to be taking a look at some of the models here. And we do have the GEFS week 1 supercell composite parameter and also the week 2. And then we also have the CFS V2 week 1, week 2, and week 3 supercell composites accumulations here. And so mainly looking at the GEFS accumulations here. And so this allows us to see the ensembles, and this is once again the GEFS ensembles, and this shows the accumulated supercell composite parameter where conditions are kind of the most favorable for supercells. And so if you look at the week one range from April 21st through the 27th, as you can see into Oklahoma and Texas, you do have a little bit of a kind of mid-range look on that, maybe 14, 15 showing up there into portions of Texas and Oklahoma. And then if you look into week two, and that would be through the 28th through the 4th here, you can see once again across Oklahoma, maybe Texas again, even up into Missouri, you still have a little bit of a threat there showing up on the GEFS ensembles. But then as you get into, if you look at the CFS version 2 here for the week 1 and week 2 supercell composite parameter, you can see a pretty evident uptick in severe supercell composite with your supercell composite, across the central U.S. for, once again, that week 2 range, April 28th through the 5th of May, and then for the week 1 as well, April 21st through the 28th across the central U.S., but mainly with that 28th through the 5th of May there, showing a pretty strong signal for this range. And so I just wanted to show that as well. There's a pretty decent agreement that we will see a uptick in severe weather as we close out April and get into early May. But that'll be it. And I appreciate all of y'all watching. And I will probably have another video out maybe sometime this week. I can't guarantee what day. But once again, I appreciate all of y'all watching, and I hope y'all have a great week.